you have questions, just put them in the chat window for me and I will ask them to the authors. But Jessica and Scott are going to do most of the talking, okay? So Scott Gould's previous book, Strangers to Temptation, is a linked story collection the Atlanta Journal-Constitution called a compulsive read, and forward reviews dubbed funny, often poignant, and not easily forgotten. It was published by Hub City Press in 2017. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in Kenyon Review, New Stories from the South, Black Warrior Review, Carolina Quarterly, Pithead Chapel, Garden and Gun, New Ohio Review, The Bitter Southerner, and Crazy Horse, among others. He is a two-time winner of the South Carolina Arts Commission's Individual Artist Fellowship in Prose and the South Carolina Academy of Authors Fiction Fellowship. He lives in Sans Souci, South Carolina, and teaches creative writing at the South Carolina Governor's School for the Arts and Humanities. He's joining us from there today. Jessica Handler is the author of the novel The Magnetic Girl, winner of the 2020 Southern Book Prize, an Indie Next pick, Wall Street Journal's Spring 2019 pick, Bitter Southerner Summer 2019 pick, and a SIBA Okra pick. Her memoir, Invisible Sisters, was named one of the 25 books all Georgians should read, and her craft guide, Braving the Fire, a guide to writing about grief and loss, was praised by Vanity Fair magazine. Her writing has appeared on NPR, in Tin House, Drunken Boat, The Bitter Southerner, Brevity, Creative Nonfiction, Newsweek, The Washington Post, Electric Lit, and More magazine. She teaches creative writing at Oglethorpe University in Atlanta and lectures internationally on writing. Thank you both so much for joining us, and I can't wait to hear what you guys are talking about today.
Jackie, thank you so much. This is, let's see, I'm trying to go to speaker view here. This is great, and thank you all so much for bearing with the technical vagaries of the evening. You know, we were saying that the one good thing about doing this is that we can have people come in from all over the universe, but that relies on the technology coming to the party. So, Scott, hi.
Hey.
Hey, dude. I'm all right. What I want to do is I want to ask you to read just a little bit from Whereabouts, maybe a couple of minutes, just to get us in the groove, and then let's talk about it. I've got some questions about Missy and about Skiles and about the monks and about all kinds of stuff.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for hanging around and switching over. I see Shannon working furiously to get my father on to Zoom because he's not. But he made it to the Crowdcast thing, so, and I didn't. So anyway, yeah, I'm just going to read just a couple pages here from this book. Whereabouts is Missy Ballou is the protagonist of this book, and she's about to turn 18 years old when her father dies suddenly, and he dies in the first paragraph of page 1 of chapter 1. I decided I wanted to kill somebody off quick in this book. So anyway, he dies, and early in the book, she's dealing with her mother, and they are going to the visitation at the funeral home. And I thought I would read a piece from that. I see some people have doubled up from the last time we did this. This is something new, so you don't have to hear the same thing again. I appreciate you coming by again. Oh, and before I start on this, I want to thank Jessica so much for doing this. I appreciate you taking the time and doing it. And I want to thank Hub City for holding the event and being so patient with me while I was running back and forth between rooms. Alan knows, he knows which rooms I was going to, trying to get a computer that worked, and it didn't. But thank you so much. Hub City is kind of home for me. You know, my first book of stories came out from Hub City, and they're great people. And please support your local bookstores, your local indies. They need it. They need it right now. All right. So I don't think there's anything else I need to tell you. This is when they've gone on visitation, and the name of the Missy's mother's name Mona, and the name of the funeral director is Asa Floyd, and he's kind of a smarmy character pretty quickly in the book. And I've been told that I can't read like this, although you can see my Wofford hat now, but I'll try to look up a little more now. So they're at the funeral, they're at the visitation. Asa waved them forward. Waving seemed to be his gesture of choice. Missy tugged her mother, who followed, if not willingly, at least easily, like a toddler. A few steps from the casket, Missy caught sight of her dead father. An unfamiliar, puzzled expression stretched across his face, as though he were trying to remember the name of an old song or an old baseball player. He appeared to be at a complete loss, or just plain lost. Missy wondered if Asa molded that look onto her daddy's face, or if that was actually the last expression he ever possessed. As if, when he realized his body was shutting down, he lay on the engine compartment of his old Ford and tried to recall who the American League batting champ was in 1967. That's where she found him in his car, inside of his car engine block. A wave of anger burned across Missy's cheek. Then her mouth tightened into a smile. Her father was simply too comical to mourn at that moment. A streak of rouge or blush ran like a red mistake up each side of his cheekbones. His eyebrows, which had always been thick and sun-bleached and out of control, lay trimmed and combed into a sad perfection, then colored slightly to match his hair. And the hair, brushed straight back away from his forehead with some kind of thick gel, created the illusion of a tremendously large head. His lips, pursed on the verge of a pout, were the color of the bricks of their house. Missy's mother slumped into her, sucking breaths without releasing any air in return. Missy listened and waited for the exhale, while Asa stood away from them, his arms crossed like an usher at a movie theater. Missy led her mother to a nearby chair, sat her down, and returned to the edge of the casket. Inside the pocket of her dress, she felt for the tube of regular flavored chapstick. If there was anything her daddy would miss in whatever place he ended up, it would be his chapstick. Alive, he was never without a tube. She was sure he developed some kind of addiction to it, the regular bland flavor, not any of that silly cherry or mint. She pulled the top off the chapstick and wiped it across her lips. Ace's face was suddenly at her shoulder, his mouth near her ear. Lifelike, isn't he? He whispered. The smell of chewed out dentine gum drifted from Ace's mouth. She turned slightly so she could keep an eye on her father and still aim her reply at Asa. Yes, sir, lifelike, she said, if you work for a goddamn circus. She thought about shutting up at that point, but reconsidered, took a breath, and plowed ahead. You got him made up like a goddamn clown. I hope he doesn't scare somebody in heaven. Her voice was too loud. She talked too fast. What she said ricocheted off walls, probably unaccustomed to that kind of volume. From behind, Missy's mom blew out a sudden gust of stored-up air. The blood raced from Asa's face. Missy could tell it was language he'd rarely heard, especially from a teenager, and never in one of his visitation rooms. But for Missy, it was nothing out of the ordinary. It had come down to this. Her father was gone. Her mother was having trouble remembering how to walk without a prop from something close and at hand, and lately that something was shaped like a bottle. And the funeral director was making her stomach turn. Missy felt it was the perfect time to shock anybody still alive enough to listen. So she said it, and its rumble passed away quickly, about as swiftly as her father had, without so much as an echo in the room with the coffin. Asa backed away from Missy like she was infectious. While he kept his eye on her, he felt behind him for a seat, falling into one next to her mother. Missy heard her mother apologize for her daughter. She's upset. Well, just look at him, Missy said. Jesus. Her mother stared at Asa, who put his arm around her shoulders. She buried her face into the crisp folds of his suit coat. Missy saw a tear or two dot his lapel. When the two of them finally turned away from Missy, she quickly dropped the chapstick over the lip of the casket and watched it disappear somewhere between her daddy's suit and the soft blue coffin liner. The rest of the visitation went smoothly and quietly. Missy spent most of the day holding her mother up by her thin shoulder and smiling at people she'd never seen before. She didn't say another word to Asa Floyd, mostly because he stayed far out of her range, but she knew he was there. She could feel his eyes studying their grief. And that's the end of chapter 1.
Thank you so much, Scott. You know, before I get to my questions, I have to tell you that so much of the writing in this is just, the language is just remarkable. Saying like a red mistake, or there's another phrase I love about eyeglasses thick enough to start fires. I read that and I was like, oh, I want to write that. So that was wonderful. So Missy is directionless without her father, right? Talk a little bit about how the death of her father right off the top sets this story in motion.
Yeah, there's direction and finding your way in the world is a lot about what the book is about, I guess, if you had to put a thematic stamp on it. But, you know, early on you find out that the dad was very controlled by directions. When he plans family trips, he marks it out with a magic marker, and they know exactly how many miles are going to go. And he's got a, I don't know if, I guess I'm showing my age here, but, you know, when you used to have cars that had a compass mounted on the dash of the car, and it would kind of float there and you'd see your directions coming. When he had one of those, I see some people nodding. People remember that. But when that happens, when he dies, she flounders for a bit until a couple of things happen that she decides to go into motion, and she decides the road, and then it becomes a road novel. It becomes a road story, and she wanders trying to find her way until she, I think at the end of the book, she's finally found out kind of where she needs to be, and not where she expected to be.
Not where she expected to be. I want to talk a little bit about some of the people she encounters along the road, along with the general idea of a road novel. But one of the first people she encounters, and she encounters him shortly after the part you read, is a guy named Skiles. And he's what, her third cousin? He's a distant cousin, and he's older than she is.
He's her third. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, he's her third cousin. And you write that he collected things that were ultimately useless, which I love. But he also collects like random facts, and they go watch the monks in the abbey. Is Missy a collectible for him? Talk to us about Skiles, because he's fascinating, and I feel like Missy is a collectible for him.
Yeah. This is one of those times when somebody really smart like Jessica Handler asks you about something and you didn't really mean it that way. You just go, yeah, that's exactly what you meant.
That happens with all writers, right? Somebody says something about your book and you're like, oh, yeah, that was subtext.
Oh, you're so smart. You picked that up. You picked right up on that.
And meanwhile, you're thinking like, oh, crap, what did I do? Well, let me back
No. But I can talk, because I think you're right. Now that you're saying that. Well, Skiles is a guy who shows back. This novel is set in the 70s in Kingstree, South Carolina, in a lot of, and mostly in the South, but a lot in Kingstree, and he shows up into town every month or two or so, washes his truck, hangs out for a while, goes to the bluff above the monastery and watches the holy men walk back and forth, and then recharges his battery and hits the road again. He never knows where he's going. He just goes. And one of his habits is to, I've always been fascinated by, I guess since newspapers are becoming dinosaurs these days, but newspapers, when they used to have space and columns to fill, they would put these random facts in, and it would be like, how many tires are burned every year in the country, or some weird thing. And he buys newspapers and he clips those out and he keeps them, and he collects these random facts. He fills his head with useless information. So yeah, you're right. He is a collector. And yes, and she is in a sense, she's a collectible thing. She, what they're doing together is not real, family oriented, but but she sees that as the price for getting away.
Yeah.
And he sees that as she's just there. She's just another thing in his, like the canteen and the camping gear in his back of his truck. She's just there. And that turns out to be sort of a downfall that causes her to take action after that. But yeah, you're right. It is interesting that she becomes one of these things that, wow, she's figuratively tucked in his pocket for a while. Just like those facts, just like those useless, trivial facts.
And I got to tell you, you nailed the 70s with Skiles. You really did. I was reading that. I was like, I know this guy, or I knew this guy.
Oh God, I hope you don't know that guy.
Well, not personally, but he just hit all these like 70s, wandering dudes kind of thing, and it was great.
Yeah.
So The next person she runs into, I think, is Hassan, right? Well, there's the guys from the Marines.
Right.
But she runs into a bunch of different people who all kind of help her on her way, in a way. So let me go to Hassan.
Yeah.
He owns the pancake house, the little pancake house, and he owns there's a motel attached to it, and
Yeah.
he's obsessed with travel. He represents a lot of departures for Missy, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. I've always, I was always interested in, and I think people of my era will remember these places, these highways that were the highways to the coast or to resorts that were the 4-lane highway, maybe 2-lane, maybe 4-lane, and there was always restaurants and motels, motels, where you pulled up to the room, and then the interstates came in. Then they decided they were going to build the interstate system, and when I-95 came through South Carolina, all these places just died, and they died quick. I mean, it was once the interstate opened up, within 2 years, they were gone. My father used to take us to a place called Green Gables on Highway 321 near King Street, and you would see that it was packed. It was packed with people going toward the coast, and then they died. So I wanted to set this part in this. This guy, that's his American dream, to own a dilapidated motel in a rundown pancake house, and where he can go in and be the boss and be the king. And he worships the griddle. He thinks that's almost like an altar for him, is the griddle, where he can, just be the man. But he works so hard, and he's kind of anchored there. So he travels, he's got travel posters pinned all over his room, and he plans trips he'll never take. And, she sees that, and it has an effect on her. He thinks she is this miracle that's come to his pancake house, and she's just kind of catching her breath and trying to figure out what to do next. But you've got this idea of her with her travels and her meanderings, and him with his imaginary meanderings, and that sort of starts meshing together at a certain point.
Yeah.
But,
the pancake house is where Missy starts to gain agency. You write that nothing overwhelmed her once she sort of got cooking, literally and figuratively.
Well, and because she doesn't, I guess what she doesn't realize is that she's settled. She's found a place. She's found a place where she can, but she's still got this wanderlust brewing in her, which I would probably debate was from her father, something that, because he directions. He collected compasses.
Yeah.
He collected compass roses. He thought those were works of art. And I think when she doesn't realize how to be happy with staying still, and she wants to, but she can't do it. Ultimately, she can't do it.
Well, you and I both, I'm looking at the epigraph for the book, I'm flipping to it, and your epigraph here is Isaac Newton, right? It's one of the laws of motion, and that was integral to Magnetic Girl. And tell me about picking this epigraph: the change of motion is proportional to the motive force impressed.
I had that epigraph on this thing early. I mean, when I started thinking about the character and what I wanted to do with this book, and let me this book had its origins in a short story.
Yeah.
That appeared in Black Warrior Review. And when I finally got to the point where I said, I better try to write a novel here. And I said, and the story is I said, I'm going to put it right in the middle of the novel. I'm going to write half the novel to the point of that story and the other half after that story. Like, how did she get here? Where did she go after the story? So motion was always an idea, because in the story, Skiles and Missy are already in motion. They're already moving. It's literally the middle of the novel, I think. Mm-hmm. And I just started thinking about what controls us, what controls motion. And I started thinking about physics, and I started thinking about Isaac Newton. I started thinking, there's something there's something in that mathematical physical world that keeps things in motion. And does it work on us? Does it work on human beings? Does it work on people like this character that I've got in this book? So, and also, you know, with the epigraph, I wanted to suggest that idea of motion, that idea of moving, that idea of keeping moving, keeping moving.
How does the novel differ from the short story? I'm not I know that it was a story, but I'm not familiar with it.
The story is, it's, you know, because it's short fiction, because it's a short story, it's very, you know, it starts as far in it, and she and her cousins, her third cousin, are on the road, and she thinks that she's found somebody that she can be a companion with, and she can, you know, stay with, and she finds out that may not be the case because he is collecting other things that she doesn't know about, and that's the story was because Skiles was he's got this long hair and it's kind of gray, and he looks a little biblical, and the story was called Sort of a Prophet. And that's a line that's in that section. But, you know, I think you know, I put a big asterisk by this, Jessica, because I don't really know that I know what I'm doing yet. So I was looking for a way that I could figure out how to write it. Because this novel's been bumping around. I mean, it's chronology. It's been around a long time, and I don't know that I really knew what the hell I was doing when I wrote it so many years ago. So I kept pulling it out and doing new drafts and figuring out more about the character. And I was getting older, hopefully a little bit wiser. And I was trying to, you know, I was thinking this is what, keep throwing these roadblocks, no pun intended, but keep throwing these roadblocks.
We're talking about Missy and her traveling and inertia. She has a lot of inertia, but so is this desire to escape. And you write, I think in the Little Pancake House section, that the hardest choices required speed, right? So what is the choice that Missy makes there when she realizes the hardest choice requires speed?
It's back to motion again.
Yeah.
To motion. She you know, you know, for her, safety is movement. Safety becomes movement.
Until.
Yeah. And I think what I meant by the hardest choices require speed is that usually hard choices come at a time where you've got to make a decision. And if you wait, you know, it might not be a good situation.
Yeah.
So she makes choices quick. Now she's usually spurred by an event. I don't know if, you know, there's usually a catalyst for her going into motion, but yeah, you know, I think it's all for her. Safety is movement, safety movement.
Yeah.
Even at the end where she hopefully has found some sense of safety, there's still a little sense that she's got to go somewhere. She's got to go somewhere.
So do you think it's fair to say that this is a novel in the picaresque tradition, since you and I are both teachers? Can we say that?
Yeah, I guess. You know, I would think so. Although the picaresque novels that I think of are
they tend to be boys.
Yeah, and that's always a, you know, I wrote this thing, the first draft of this way back. I wrote it for my daughters. I said I want to write a book where I have a female protagonist who finds her way in the world. So yeah. I wonder, they were young at that point, and I wanted to write that for them. And I had a lot of people tell me you shouldn't do that. That you're a guy and you can't be doing that.
Oh, is this that conversation about how you can't write a person who isn't you?
Yeah, and but this was again, this was a many moons ago. And that, I was getting it, from different sources, like, agents that were turning it down, or editors, and we're saying, you can't do that. You can't do that. You don't have license to do that. And I went, nah, and I see some of my writer friends on here. That's the worst thing you can tell a writer is you
Right.
can't do that. I know they've hit that same thing.
So what's the answer to writing someone who isn't you? And I've had this conversation with a lot of people, and I'm always curious what people say. And I don't agree with it. I don't think that, obviously you wrote a teenage girl and you did it well. So what's the answer? What's the way into doing that?
Well, I think you have to have a model that you're looking at. Like, I had my girls growing up, and I was imagining them as teenagers. I was imagining what they would be like if they were facing these situations. And at that point in time in my life, I was living on the roof with 3 females. So I had a lot of that influence going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I think you have to go into it with a certain kind of humility, knowing that I don't know everything about this. I have an imagination and I can use that, but my imagination should be based on something real. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I tend to write from a real autobiographical stance a lot of times. And that's what I was imagining people I'd met, women I'd met, young teenagers I'd met, and doing that thing, Jessica, what you do with you create that hybrid, that amalgam of all these things to create your character.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just it's a uncomfortable conversation, I think, sometimes, to say when people say you can't do that. Mm-hmm. Listen, I had a teacher. I don't know if I had a professor one time tell me, when I was teaching in his department at one time, he said, you can't be a writer, you need to be a lawyer. And I said, why is that? He said, well, because you haven't had anything real dramatic or traumatic happen to you. You haven't. He just gave
you something right there.
Oh, he's in a book. No, okay. Don't worry, he's in a book. But I just went, oh, and he gave me an example of somebody who's had something traumatic happen to him, and said, he's got a basis to write and you don't. And I said, well, what about imagination? Mm-hmm. What about my ability to do that? And also I was like, I think at the time I was 23, and I went, give me a few years. I'm sure some bad shit's going to happen. Anyway, so I think that's sort of the same thing, is that I think there are bad ways to handle that.
Yeah.
When you try to write from a position where you don't occupy that very position. But I think there's a good way to go about it, and there's a humble way, and there's a way to go about it where you can do it and pay service to it.
Right. I agree with you. I got a couple more questions, and then I want to go to the assembled, because I know they have questions. First of all, a sort of a silly question. What on earth is a feist dog?
Oh, just feist dog?
Yeah.
That's one of those mean little dogs. You don't know what the breed is, and it's usually under the porch. And if you come within 50 feet of the porch, it's going to come out and tear you apart.
Where did this word come from? Is it a colloquialism or a vernacular for feist, as in feisty? Because you spell it F-Y-C-E.
I think I maybe read it in Faulkner the first time or something like that. I don't know.
I see George is giving me a hard time about this.
George still on here?
He's giving me a hard time about it. And I'm in Atlanta, y'all. I'm only like 3 hours away. It's not like I'm
I remember when I grew up, man, when you would ride your bike to the baseball field, somebody would tell you, man, there's a feist dog right there on 2nd Avenue. You either got to go real fast or don't even go by that house.
That is fantastic. Well, from you, I got some vernacular that, even though I was grew up in, and continue to live in the South, I never heard it. I've never seen it. So although George is taking me to task on this, and if it does come from Faulkner, I'm going to be so humiliated, says this English professor. F-Y-C-E is how it is in the book. So 2 quick questions. What is Missy seeking? Is she looking for her mother or a mother? Is she looking for an end of loneliness? What is she looking for? What does Missy want?
Well, I think that she wants, I think because this thing opens with the death of her father, there's a big hole left. And he was a wanderer. He was a traveler. He like I said, he collected compasses. And I think when he's gone, she's lost her direction. So I think she's looking for some direction that he always provided. Plus, she was at that age. Oh, she was 18. She was getting ready to graduate from high school when he died. And she is at that point where you make a lot of decisions in your life. I think there's a mention of that, she was looking, the college isn't, she's not going to college now.
Right.
So I think she's looking for a destination, maybe. She's looking for a place to land, which is why I thought put her on the road and then let her find these possible destinations where she can be happy. And then, and then we see where she ends up.
Right. And I don't want you to give away the ending of the book, but what haven't I asked you? What do you want to tell me that, or us, that I haven't asked you? There's always like, oh, is she going to ask me about such and such?
No, I mean, like, one thing that I was, I noticed the other day, the title of this book, Whereabouts, was a title of the book years ago in an early draft. And I scrapped it because at one point the book was divided into sections that were subtitled by the names of the men that Missy encountered at that point. And so at that point I called it Missy Ballou and the Holy Men.
Yeah.
Not a great title. I'm not a good titler. But I had this title Whereabouts years and years ago, and I scrapped it. So I was talking to the editor one day who got rid of all that crappy divided into sections and all that kind of stuff. He said, just make this a running narrative, and he was great, and I appreciate him. He made it a better book, I think. But we were talking one day, and I said, I'm not sure if I like this title, and he was like, well, maybe we just call it Missy Ballou. That'll look good on the cover, Missy Ballou. And Ballou is a name from King Street. I had a buddy growing up named Freddie Ballou, and I always liked that name, so I stole it. But he said, Missy's, I don't know, Missy's always, she's we don't ever know whereabouts Missy is. And I went, what? I went, oh, we're going to use that title. And then, we did, and I really like it. I think it works. So I went on Google, when we started, and I searched, and I didn't see anything with that title. And there was some music stuff that had a title, but it seemed pretty clean. So we did the book and everything, and it's up and it's ready to go and it's up for pre-sale. And then I see, I went on Amazon one day, and there's, Jhumpa Lahiri has a new novel coming out in May called Whereabouts. And I went, oh crap, because I don't think Jhumpa Lahiri is at home worried about some bozo down in South Carolina who's got a novel named Whereabouts. I don't think she's losing sleep over that. But it's just weird now to see, like, same exact word,
But you might get shelved next to her, or like, on a table, or like a face out. So, ride that train. I get shelved next to Chelsea Handler all the time, and I'm like, sure, go for it. So speaking of the Holy Men, tell us about the Holy Men, and then we're going to go to questions from the floor.
Well, when I grew up in the 70s in King Street, South Carolina, my father, who just turned 88 years old yesterday, is on, and we lived in King Street, and he was a forester there, and so that's why I got a lot of trees going on in this book. Anyway, there was a retreat near King Street called Springbank, and I know exactly the road you turn down to go to Springbank, and that's where people can go and they rent it out for retreats. But at one point it was a monastery, and men came there, and they went through their rituals and whatever they were doing. And I just thought, I always wanted to use that in some way, in something, and I think I tried to do it in a short story one time and it didn't work. So and this time I felt like that early in the book, and this is not giving anything away, that Skiles and Missy go to this bluff and they look down onto the retreat and they see the brothers walking back and forth in their robe,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and they have a discussion about how to live a life like that without distraction and that sort of thing. And so it came out, again, autobiographical. It came out of a place that I really knew and I really wanted to use. And yeah, that King Street for me is the fertile ground. I tend to always go back to that area for stories and images, and it's probably because of the age that I was when I was there, like, you know, from first grade right on up to the 8th grade, which is kind of an important time of life. And,
yeah, very important. This is a wonderful book, and it's so beautifully written. And I grew up in the 70s too, and I remember them fondly, what I remember of them. So yeah, so it really put me there. So what I want to do is I want to open it to the questions, and I think Jackie, you're gonna handle that. Okay, so we'll just go to questions.
Well, we don't have any questions so far. It's mostly comments. There's
because a lot of comments about feist dogs. So yeah, I'm glad that I got us talking about feist dogs. Well, I've got some more questions if nobody has one.
George Singleton has owned a number of feist dogs in his life, so you know, he can speak quite clearly to that.
And George can also train a possum, apparently.
Yeah.
So yeah, so okay, so I learned a lot from you. So let me see, what are some of my other questions? There are a lot of pivots in this book, and there's I don't know, you want to talk about how Missy develops motivation. Early in the book, when her childhood friend Angela goes to get married to her boyfriend, and they bring Missy along, and then Missy kind of bails on them. And the boyfriend, Craig, says, you've got to have motivation. He kind of scolds her.
Yeah.
What is it that happens to Missy that gives her motivation? Can you talk about that, or do you feel like that's giving it away?
You know, I think, you know, yeah, you're right. There's a lot, and that's kind of, I love to do that kind of thing. I talk to my students about pivoting in essays and stories about there's a times where you may need to take the reader to a certain point and then take a left or right turn that they're not quite expecting. I think the scene that you're talking about where she's asked to be a witness at the wedding.
At the wedding, yeah.
I think she sort of realizes the sort of the futility of what they're doing. Like I think in that section, if I'm not mistaken, there's an idea, you know, that's what people did in that town, is that you grew up, you know, you maybe, even if you went away to college or something, you came back, you married a childhood sweetheart, and you stayed in town, and you kind of, you know, and she may not know why she resists that, but she resists that idea. And I think shortly thereafter, that scene, something happens that just sends her into the wind. She says, you know, that I don't want to, that's one we don't really want to talk about, because it's kind of weird and wonderful, maybe, I don't know. But it's yeah, I think, you know, it's just, you know, have you ever known those people who just, when trouble arises, they run, they leave, they say,
oh sure,
you know, yeah. So it's not so much out of fear, it's out of, okay, I don't want to deal with this, I want to go somewhere else. I don't want to deal with this, I want to go somewhere else.
Right.
And that's kind of what I had in mind with her, is just to, you know, what happens when you keep putting these things in front of her? How is she going to react? And it got kind of fun to kind of do that whole, you know, only trouble's interesting.
Oh yeah.
Throw some trouble at her. You know?
What was your favorite part to write? I have definite parts in my books where I'm like, oh, I had such a good time writing that, as opposed to another part where I'm like, stick a pin in my eye. So what were the fun parts?
Fun is such a strange word.
I
Just
know. My husband always tells me that writing is fun, and I'm like, I don't really think it is fun. I mean,
I
it's
like.
satisfying, but
Um, I want to. I'll try to say this without revealing the end, but it was the end because it's something that I have never gone through. I will never go through. I have witnessed on a couple of occasions, but it's something that I thought it's going to be fun to go through the process of trying to how to put that and make it believable. Back to that thing we were talking about. I don't know if you know the scene I'm talking about, but it's the end of the book, and I thought that was a fun challenge.
with the holy men.
Well, even just before that,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Now we're talking around this though, Scott.
I'm
So people
sorry.
who haven't read it are going to be like,
sorry.
"What are you talking about?" So you either have to give them a little bit, or we can't tell them.
Yeah. I mean, if you haven't read the book, and I'm sure you're going to go right after this and order several copies from.
Yes, you are.
There it is. See, Jackie can.
There it is.
Yeah. There's a scene where I'm going to tease this. Something that will never happen to a man. How about that? You know.
In current scientific.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
Where we are right now. I think maybe didn't Woody Allen make a movie about how that could possibly? Anyway, never mind.
Yeah, he did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, but the parts for me, the parts that were, because I'm so used to writing short fiction that for me, giving myself allowing myself to let a scene linger a little longer, that was the hard part for me. Is that because I'm used to writing short fiction where you create your conflict and you keep it going and you end it.
Mm-hmm.
or you resolve it somehow. So to give myself a leave to do that was hard. But
yeah,
we're all learning, right? We learn every time we write something.
And writing a novel is a long game. We do have a question here. Should I just go ahead and ask it, Jackie? Cameron Hambrick says, "How has Missy changed since the first draft?" Good question.
That's a really really good question because there have been so many drafts and so much time has passed. I think she got smarter. I think in the early drafts, I think she was more like, I'm going to let the world beat me around a little bit. And now I think in this draft, she's like, when she makes a decision, she moves and she goes. And I think she's gotten a little smarter about that. I think maybe since the early drafts, her dialogue has changed a lot. I remember going back and thinking, I don't like the way this 18-year-old talks. I want her to be, I remember going back at one point and saying, she's smarter than I'm making her. She's more pointed. She can say things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she was mature enough in the early drafts. So that's changed, but like I said last week when I was talking about Jessica, I'd be embarrassed to tell you how long this novel's been banging around. It's just, it's one of those situations. I was too naive early on to know that you gotta, if 3 or 4 people turn it down, it's okay. You got to keep plugging at it. So I would shelve it for years at a time and then go back to it. So maybe the moral of this story is I had to wait till I was a certain age to be able to figure out what to do with this kid. And
yeah. Who's got another question? I want to hear from y'all. Or we'll bring in a feist dog to ask a question.
It's okay.
I don't have a feist dog. I got a feist cat, but I don't have a feist dog.
It's late and people had to wait around for idiot Scott to figure out how to, get around the thing. But
that was you.
This is a terrific book, and you've gotten a really good review in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Suzanne Van Atten raved about it, and you've gotten great coverage, and it's a really, really enjoyable book. I very much liked it.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. And and listen, first of all, if you haven't read The Magnetic Girl, get a copy of that.
There she is.
Well, I had a copy, but it's in one of those rooms where I was fleeing.
Well, you and I have both written about teenage girls, although granted, my teenage girl was 90 years before yours, if I did the math right. Teenage girls who felt a need to evidence change in their lives and weren't sure why and weren't sure how it would turn out. But both for Missy and for my Lulu, turned out okay.
Yeah. I mean, happy endings are nice sometimes, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Jackie, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I put a link to Scott's book in the chat window, and we do have signed copies in the store. This one, let me see if I can pull up the signature.
Yes, in the chat, in the Zoom group, in the Zoom group chat are live purchase links to whereabouts.
And there's one for The Magnetic Girl because it just came out in paperback, so I thought I should just give a little
and
shout.
there's a book plate signed copies there as well.
And if you have an inkling to buy this book or Jessica's book, buy it through your local indie bookstore. Even if it takes an extra call, call them, ask them, because they at this point in time in this quasi dumpster fire every year, indie bookstores could use your help. So I appreciate everybody coming on tonight, and I appreciate you hanging out. Oh, look!
Zora's here. A feist cat. Zora's here.
It's a feist cat.
She's been sitting right next to the computer, so I had to just put her on screen for a second. She's sitting right next to me, so she's
well, anyway, I would like to thank everybody. I see some old friends on there that I haven't talked to in a while, and Evie says good night. Alan said Evie said good night, Evie. Oh, okay.
Thank you so much,
everyone.
You guys have
Jessica, thank you.
Thanks,
and thank Pub City. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks, y'all. And everybody vote. Don't forget to vote.
That's right.
Have a good night, everyone.